Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Books I Should Have Read a Long Time Ago, desultorily chosen based on how I feel at the time of picking. And we are continuing, because I am not that creative, with the Arabian Nights, which, as I say every single time, is not this one, but this has a better cover than the one that I got off of Gutenberg. Now, so the complete Arabian Nights, Book 7. We are now on volume 7 of 16, so we're more than halfway through night-wise, but we are less than halfway through book-wise. This one, it has a few interesting qualities, this one. For one thing, a large portion of the first section of this is a continuation and ending of a particular story that had started in the last one. And this massive front-loaded section has a cannibal in it, and there's this whole thing with a woman who gets assaulted and raped, and then she runs off and gets found by a man, and by a king, and he takes her in, and she winds up his favorite concubine or whatever. There's all this stuff. The real story kicks in with her son, who the king decides that he doesn't like for reasons, and, the guy has to and various things happen, and eventually they wind up on opposite sides of a war which, by the way, seems to sort of go by virtue of, and then the guy ran off and he found an ally, and he said, "We need to go fight this guy," and the guy says, yeah, we do, and then they fought, and then our hero won. And so his brother decided to run off and find another ally. And so, it kind of goes on and on and on. But that's not really the part that interested me most in that. What interested me most is this is set in a time before Muhammad, but a time when Muslims still existed, which, and I am oversimplifying here because, frankly, I have not studied Islam at any depth, but one of the conceits of Islam is fundamentally that being a Muslim had always existed. It's just that God tried to tell the Jews how to be proper Muslims, and the Jews screwed it up and became Jews instead. So then God had Jesus come around and try to explain to people how to be a proper Muslim, and everybody screwed it up and we got Christians. And then he came up to Muhammad and said, "Okay, let's try this again. Dude, you get it right." And Muhammad finally got it right, or at least that's sort of the idea. So the course of this book, our hero, who is the son of the woman who was assaulted, who falls in love with the king's daughter, and the king decides, in spite of the fact that the kid had been his favorite and he'd practically raised him, that now that he's fallen in love with his daughter, he's now the evilest thing ever, and tries to have him killed and stuff. Anyways, so he's trundling along, and he runs across a guy, and he says to this guy, "So, who are you? What are you doing here? What's up with your, praying thing? What's this thing that you're doing is all about?" And this guy explains to him that he's a Muslim, and a whole bunch of stuff about, and explains Islam to him, and the guy says, and our hero says, "Wow, that's amazing. How do I become one of you?" And so he says, "Well, all you gotta do," and the thing is that to profess Islam, you are supposed to say there is no God but God and Muhammad is his prophet, but since this is a story set before the existence of Muhammad, obviously Muhammad is a non-issue, because he doesn't exist yet. So instead you are supposed to say, "And Abraham is his friend." Which, sure, that makes as much sense as anything else. And so he professes to Islam, and goes, "Wow, this is great," and goes back and converts all of, his attached soldiers and so on, and because he's now got soldiers and followers and what all, and he converts them. He's explains what Islam is, and they all go, "Yes, let's leap on this bandwagon," which is the kind of thing that that you look at and you say, converting people to a religion really isn't normally that quick. You don't normally walk up to somebody and explain the thing and everybody goes, yeah, we're just going to do that. It's usually a slightly longer drawn out process, even if you do convince someone to convert. But anyways, sure, these are fairy tales, so to speak. So he converts them, and then they stumble across the cannibal. Now, he's a giant, but he's also a cannibal, and what he does is he has a section of road, and he basically attacks and eats anybody who comes across it, and occasionally people send travelers there in order to get them killed, as one does. And he converts the giant cannibal to Islam. The part of this that's really super interesting to me, aside from the number of times that he goes up to somebody and says, the number of times in that story that they say, and then they converted a bunch of people to Islam, and anyone they didn't, they killed, is the cannibal. Because, call me crazy, but I think cannibalism is slightly against some of the precepts of Islam, that Muslims are not generally in favor of the eating of the flesh of other human beings. As a general rule, I might be crazy, but I think that it's something that will be disapproved of. So, in this book, you keep having these scenes where the giant, who is now a Muslim and on their side, will come out and he'll be like, oh, you got that guy? Great. Let's put him on a spit and I'm gonna eat him. And, you'll have a king who will say, what happened to my sons? And the giant will pop up and say, well, they came across and they bother me, so I cooked them and ate them. Like, this is a thing that happens over and over and over again, and it's gruesome, but it's also incredibly weird to me, because he has officially professed Islam, and yet nobody seems to so much as blink at the fact that they have a human-eating giant traveling around with them. That just, nobody seems to have any sort of objection to this, and it's real weird. Following this, which is a lengthy, big story that has a dramatic finale and much war and, takeover of what would appear to be the entire Middle East, plus, Here There Be Dragons parts unknown. But following that, we have a bunch of stories that are stories that often, they're the kind of stories that feel like they just didn't really go anywhere. Like, okay, so there's this one story where our narrator says that he falls in love with a woman, and when her father takes her away from him to, get married to somebody else or just to get her away from him, he collects a camel and goes following after her, but he gets lost in the desert, stumbles across a guy in the desert, turns out to be one of his cousins, and that guy is out in the desert because he too fell in love with a young woman whose father forcibly married her to somebody else, and he sort of hangs around in this tent, and he periodically meets up with this young woman, and they spend nights together because they are very much in love, and, she didn't want to marry the guy she's married to, and so on and so forth. So our narrator sticks around for a few days, in part because of his cousin has said that he wants to sort of do the full proper hospitality thing, because, there are rules about hospitality and how many days you have to put somebody up for and put up with them, and so on and so forth. Hospitality being one of those things that in many places is traditionally sacred, and indeed there are unwritten laws about hospitality even today, after all. But anyways, so he's staying with his friend, and his friend goes out one night and comes back and is distraught. And he's carrying a lion's head with him. And he takes the lion's head and he kisses it and he says, When my girlfriend was coming to meet me this time, she got caught and eaten by a lion. So I killed the lion, and now I am going to die, and I want you to bury me with what remains of her, which is this lion that I killed. And then he, like, drops over dead. And so our narrator gives him his funeral rites and buries him with the lion head that is, quote unquote, the last of his true love. And, and he's real sad about it for a while. The end. Like, it didn't really go anywhere. I mean, things happened, but it sort of feels like there wasn't really a point to it. So you have that, which was just weird. You also have the first story in this that I have run across that is actually exactly the same. Like, there are some stories in there where, there in particular in a previous couple books, where there was the story of the young man whose father tells him to don't hang around with wastrels and get yourself in trouble, and then when his father dies, he mourns until his wastrel friends tell him, dude, you've been doing this long enough, you should get out more. At which point he loses all of his money from hanging out with wastrels and has to go on some kind of adventure to get his fortune back, and gets a fortune back and lives happily ever after, having learned not to lose all his money from hanging around with wastrels. That's a plot outline, and there are several stories that follow the plot outline. But this particular story is the same story from a couple books back. And the story is, by the way, one of the other themes in this, a young man who hears about an attractive young woman and falls immediately so in love with her that he starts to waste away from love at first hearsay. It even says this in one of the stories a little further along. All he heard was hearsay, but that was enough to make him fall in love. It's like, dude. Okay, love at first sight is already unrealistic, but love at first, I heard two people talking about it? That's just weird. So, anyways, he falls in love with this princess in a foreign land. He's a prince. And his father's advisor, his wazir, says, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to trek out there. We will figure out how to get you married to this princess. So they get out there, and and the princess, it turns out, hates all men. She just violently hates all men. Refuses to marry because, as far as she's concerned, all men are evil. And, yeah. So the prince starts to waste away again, and so on. But the princess's nurse finds him and sees him pretending to be it's pretending to sell stuff in the market, and, asks him for something that she can bring her mistress, and he gives her a thing, and, she helps him, and she takes a letter to the princess. And the princess reads the letter and becomes incredibly furious that a man would dare write her a letter telling her that she's beautiful and he loves her. Now, I can understand somebody finding it creepy, but she's genuinely angry to the point of wanting him executed for sending her a letter saying, you're really beautiful and I am sickeningly in love with you. And, the worst, and the thing is that, like, again, it could be creepy, but it's not even played in this as creepy. It's played as her saying, how dare you say I look nice? Anyway, so she gets irrational, and the nurse talks her down to writing a letter basically saying, if you ever say that again, I will have you executed. And she takes it back to the prince, and I'm running out of time. Anyways, the whole story just goes back and forth, but it's the same story. Every single plot. The only differences in that story are the fact that when the two of them finally fall in love, like, she finally falls in love with him, and they meet up, and they run together, and it's like those slow motion two lovers running to meet together, and they wrap their arms each other and immediately faint. This happens like 3 times. It happens actually a lot in these books, that these two lovers meet each other, and the first thing they do is embrace and keel over. The other thing is a eunuch whose molars she completely destroyed because she hates all men. Why does she hate men? Because she had a dream one time that a male dove didn't save his mate from something. So all men are evil. This book is wild. Anyhow, that's That's all I really got to say. So I will see you all next week.